This is essentially a self-indulgent talk. I don't specialize in industrial safety, but I had a fun time reading a lot of laws and regulations to deal with it. And somehow they gave me a slot here, so I'm going to subject you as willing victims to a comparison of how safety is approached within industrial settings and how we, as testers and clients, approach pen testing. More victims, come on. So, hopefully that's the talk you expected to be in. Who am I? I think I've lined that up with the stream as well. I'm Michael. I'm a senior pen tester at Trustmark Ultima. I shouldn't have to read that off the slide. I do know my own job. And I found at Preempt with Brandon. Love my SteelCon. Love my Hendo's Relish. I do, after coming here a few times, have 6 or 7 in the cupboard, but I've almost finished the first one, so...
Gotta look that much.
Gotta get stocked up. So, what's the problem? Is there a solution in industry? What's the counter to that? And how can this help testers, providers, and customers? You're happy for you to ask relevant questions throughout. There is a joke and 2 punchlines. That's the exciting bit, so we'll get to that in the fullness of time. So what's the problem and what's to talk about?
Apologies. There's so much screen left.
So this is prompted by, I think as a lot of people have experienced in testing, a failed failover server. It was an incident when we were testing. In production, we were looking at a critical environment. Some things may or may not have been raised when we started the test, and as a result of this, a server crashed. Which wasn't necessarily a problem, but the server that crashed was the failover server. The original server had failed, and the systems that they both managed failed closed, which is bad. And in the context of our testing, there was about a 30-minute window where someone might have had a slightly fatal incident, which is a problem most of the time. And we don't like to do it when we're testing. We did explore this, and it was essentially fine. But that was about 30 minutes of solid panic, which is never good. And I'm sure other people in the room have potentially had the same sort of situation where you've been backphoned by the client, and it's not a great place to be, especially afterwards, digging into it. So, was it just me? Is this just something that happens? Well, I spoke to the team, spoke to my co-workers, and we had a look around, saying, well, is it normal for something to be missed off the exclusions? Is it normal for an asset to be missed that is critical, that could have caused such a problem? Because I've seen it a lot, and basically I put it to the team. It's pretty common. When I was doing vCISO work, now we're doing pen testing as well, not having an up-to-date asset register, not having an up-to-date idea of where your data is or what happens if something goes wrong isn't uncommon. We were testing the failover link. Both of them are gone. It should have been excluded. Exclusions often happen because people are maybe cautious about testing it. Sometimes it's because people don't want to actually see what the results of the system are, but sometimes it's because it's so critical it shouldn't be touched at all. But sometimes people forget, you're testing an environment, the exact weak points of the environment can't always happen. And even so, we're trying to reduce the risk. We'll never remove the risk of testing, because testing has to happen. Otherwise, I just won't be employed anymore, which would be disappointing. But they've lost testing time because we've had to go back and look at what happened, and they're potentially ignoring other situations in the network that could have caused it as well. So we've got this idea of exclusions, and it seems to occur more than none, which is potentially an issue. Obviously, testing's always run the risk of unintentional damage. For computers and networks, we have a sort of idea of how we handle it. Competency, a stiff upper lip, generous liability insurance coverage. But we try and just know what we're doing, know the risks of what we're testing and the ramifications of it. As testers, as we move from sort of Nessus script kiddies up through to sort of senior consultants, there's a hope that you get a greater knowledge of, well, I'm running this script, I'm running this tool, I know exactly what the outcome of it's going to be. But we are essentially gambling to a degree. If you're playing around with a system you don't understand, or you're changing variables on a terrible Python Flask app with a UI, but the thing that it controls, potentially controlling quite a critical system, mucking around on a network that you don't fully understand can have a consequence. So maybe like if you're testers, maybe you're lucky and you've never had this, but there is this idea of accidental damage. We're trying to alleviate this with a coherent scoping process. We try and make sure we're excluding from testing these critical systems which we know might be vulnerable but would fall over. We're in production. We try and talk to our clients. And, you might just be testing mirrored or UAT infrastructure. But just because we can't see when something's gone wrong and it's passed a screen test also doesn't mean that it's not gone wrong at all. So plenty of times I've been testing production, I've come back after a year, some of the changes I've made are still there. Or you've been testing and you've just been mucking about with variables. But if you're not fully cognizant of where you are, perhaps you're in a factory or hospital sort of situation, changing different values to try and inject content, say a bad SQL injection, there are potentially consequences that might appear later down the line. So I was chatting to someone earlier today who said a week after he left site, he didn't realise because of a timing issue, that's when I don't quite understand why, his DOS script went off and took out the database. A week after leaving site. So you've done your teardown, you've done your clean up, and still, because there's not been a full awareness of where you were accessing, or you said, I was on the SQL server, but what does that mean? And what was it? You just crashed the whole company, I think. I'm looking to you, but yes. So there's many risks that can occur. The controls that we have around them are a bit woolly, a bit subjective, because we're basically saying we're putting good folks in to test this, and they'll just not make mistakes. They're running tooling where, especially nowadays, perhaps the exact awareness of what every line of it's doing or what that might result in is unknown. And also we don't know what we're testing line by line either. So there's always going to be some degree of sort of windage on our knowledge there. And clients and testers have different priorities and visibility. I'm coming in to test your production database. I'm going to be looking at differently to how you look at the thing that's running your entire company. And if we're not on the same page, that can result in damage. So hopefully, you're all sufficiently bored and ready for an introduction to what this led me into after mulling it over. So what do other sectors do? We can't be the only sector in the world that's doing testing just because we're on computers. And I was watching Lockpicking Lawyer. I saw these lockout locks. I thought those look pretty neat. And I fell into a bit of a rabbit hole based on the logic that these guys are testing and they have instant screen tests because they could lose an arm while they're testing. And that seems like a good basis for you to start making safe approaches for maintenance and testing windows. So maybe they've learned lessons in their sector that cyber hasn't yet, or have applied new learnings. So I went on a deep dive into industrial laws and safety in the UK on the logic that if people aren't losing arms all the time, it should be better. Because basically, this isn't quite my attitude, but comparing it is interesting. Is that sometimes with computers it feels a bit nebulous. They're incorporeal, they don't really exist in the real world, but they obviously control real world systems. So it feels slightly safer than if it was a dial or a switch on a panel next to a device. You'd feel almost more intrusive mucking about with it. Whereas when you're testing a computer or just running stuff on a network, it feels like it's easier to reset or roll back. But perhaps in the corporeal world, people are doing it differently. So I read all of the HSE site and went through a load of trade union recommendations and some BSI standards. They're really expensive, though, so I just try to find them online or look at YouTube videos going through them. And I'm not an expert of this by any stretch, and to illustrate that, it is far too hot, but I was going to do a gimmick where throughout this talk I've slowly put on high-vis layers to illustrate my increasing adherence to safety, but it's just too hot for that, and to be carrying around sort of massive props all day. So hopefully you'll agree with that. The takeaway from this, we're going to be on the slide for a little moment because there's a wage of notes. Going through machinery safety, so I think the reporting of injuries, diseases and dangerous occurrences regulation. So the idea of conducting regular risk assessments, looking at what you're going to be doing and saying, well, I'm going to be here testing this for this amount of time, and here's the impact it might have, here's the results that might occur, and you as the person being tested is fully aware that I'm going to have my arms inside this thing, I'm going to be crossing over hazard stripes, I'm going to be mucking about with it, so maybe don't run the line while I'm doing that. There's these concepts of residual risks and things that you manage inherently, things that are managed at the point of delivery, things that you manage once it's installed. But basically, if we parse this out, recording the changes that are being made, recording the machinery changes, so when I modified the bit on a drill or a lathe, making sure that's only being made by a competent person. Making sure that every machine, if it's in a position where there might be danger, has a clearly identified emergency stop. So you can say, actually, we're in a position where during this maintenance or testing or production, we need to just close it down. Making sure that operators of this machinery are sufficiently trained to the relevant industry, the relevant machine that they're on, the relevant tooling that they're using. Making sure that workspaces are well organised and clear, and you know exactly where your tools are, where they should be stored safely. Making sure people aren't tampering with your tools in between. Look, the provisions of use and work and equipment and other health and safety guidance, making sure that machinery is maintained appropriately, that your changes to it are planned and clearly communicated and, again, performed by competent and suitably trained personnel, and deferring to, where relevant, industry training schemes. So these weren't actually defined in static legislation, they defer to the sector leaders. I found this really exciting, but I appreciate it is very dull. But again, I have trapped you all here. But the parallels here seem pretty clear to pen testing, because you're saying, well, actually, you're running Burp Suite. This is your testing tool. Well, when you've installed that extension to it, do you know what that extension is doing? Do you know that it's tampering with every request? Or maybe it's like the WAF bypasser. It's actually adding 6 headers to every single request you send out. Sometimes that can cause a problem. Are you actually making sure that actually, with some of your automated, so like your AI enhancements, it's not firing off loads of extra requests and potentially flooding the system in a way that you're not logging and capturing, so you can't roll back what your changes are? Are you, I know every company and every pentest company is serious and competent. Are you ever in a position where you feel like you're winging it on a project, where maybe you're not the most competent person that could be on a project, or you definitely, that YouTube short you watched on IBM said mainframes is enough for you to carry out this testing now because you know what you're doing. You're not going to make a mistake. I know us a lot, we're too sensible, and that never happens. But if you could imagine. And again, the parallels of when you've been on the test and you've been doing your maintenance, have you been recording your changes? Are you able to say to the customer, I did actually muck about with that? And as the customer, you know, oh, well, that should be 5, so that's fine. We'll just reset it. And now people are getting twice as many paracetamol doses as it should be. There's kind of clear parallels to this, which I just kind of got quite excited about. The idea of maintaining work equipment. So when you've got this installed tooling, you're saying, well, actually, has someone been mucking about with the server we're using, with Nessus? We're changing the default configuration or the profiles. Sometimes, people decide that we need to be fishing in an entirely different way. So just change your cloud infrastructure. Is that a problem? So I start seeing these clear parallels and thinking, gosh, it's really exciting. We've got all of these logic of don't enter a dangerous position. Never even thought about it. Don't climb into the trash baler. Avoid, when you see there's clearly a problem here, just don't kick it. So I'm sure anyone who's done CNI testing, you've seen ICS and SCADA and just gone, we'll just avoid that entirely, because we know it's probably going to be a direct problem. So, there was a point where even, I think this was on HSC England, they said, this is potentially a significant amount of time, and for those folks to say this is potentially long, drawn-out process. You know it is. But the idea that all activity should have a risk assessment conducted. So for everything you're doing, you're saying, sitting down with someone who knows the system, what is the risk? Does the risk need to be there? Can we remove it? And will that still let us carry out doing the work that we need to do? And again, this is all makes sense, pretty much. So everyone should know the purpose and impact of testing and asset management. What is where? What's the impact if it's off, if it's on, if it's running at 4 times speed, because I was playing about with it. If I've done that, how do you roll it back? So I'm fizzing with this. But luckily, I've got mates who work in the sector. So I bribed them with beer and got them to talk to me about how they approach safety in their industry. And I was reading all the processes and safety steps, sitting down with him. This looked great. Got another friend, I won't name the industries, but I was asking them, how does it work for you? Because this is really exciting, all this health and safety guidance. And this is the first punch up. We don't do that. Yeah, we don't actually do any of that. I was trying to get a talk out of it, and this is honestly a bit of a crushing response to hear, because it was fun, and it was interesting, all these policies, and I thought, well, potentially I can get something for SteelCon out of this, and I beamed to maybe one site which took safety seriously. Out of over 5 years, 40 to 50. Which is devastating. But there's a second punchline. Because for us, it's all common sense. We don't do any of this because it's all common sense that we should be doing it already. We don't do the paper policy. So the feedback was, there's maybe, as we might find in our industry, sort of like finance people tend to take it seriously. There's maybe 1 or 2 industries where all of the paperwork has to be signed by everyone on site. Everyone has to be aware of the risk assessments. So it's common sense, I guess, for them. So I'm not really understanding this. So bribing you with beer, and I got a tour around the factory. And walking around, I had my little notebook, and I'm just asking questions. Or, what are you doing? When you say you don't do this at all, but you do this a little bit, but you don't do it at all, and we don't bother with it unless it's in this sector, what do you mean by that? Well, the machinery is inherently safe. So when I said earlier about machines being designed with residual risk, and they have stop buttons pre-installed, they don't need to check that. They sometimes check it works, but they don't need to, because it's inherent to the machine. When it comes to making sure that people are acting in a safe way, well, they do that inherently. So when I turned up, parked in the car park, got out the car, walked over with my trusty backpack on, didn't have the foam finger at the time, but I did have my little notebook. I was immediately challenged by 2 of the workers there smoking. He said, "What are you doing? Why are you here?" Which is more resistance than I've had. Well, just for comparison, the year before, I was walking out of a finance building holding the CISO's laptop, having not been challenged by anyone, up to the point where I ended up building his entire desk in the boot of my car. And yet on this one factory, I've had more resistance than I've had on physicals ever before. I then get escorted to reception and told to wait. They're keeping their eye on me until my friend comes down to show me around. At the point where he's showing me around, he takes me for an informal safety briefing, which I'm just thinking of him chatting. He's handing me a cracked mug with a cup of tea in it, and mug of tea perhaps, and he's saying, when you see these yellow lines, don't cross them. Don't put your hand inside the machines. When it's on, be safe. But it's delivered in such a casual way. It's not a formal risk assessment, because that's just their job. They're potentially going to lose their arm all the time, so they do just take it seriously. They don't actually have to be aware of it. Sorry, I'm focusing on you, but you're just like... it's just inherent for their role. And thinking, well, do we do that? Do I do that? I'd like to think I do that. I don't have that many... Well, I have enough incidents to start a talk off, but I don't inherently... Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. But how could this help us? And I think I might be running way ahead of time here. But my takeaways, thinking about this, not Hail Marying, not just running everything you've got. And hopefully we've moved past the phase where people are just opening Armitage and right-clicking and going crazy, or Empire with Death Star, and just rollicking around the network and doing everything they can. But have you actually clearly asked the client, you've asked me to do this. here's what me testing your SQL server is going to do. Your production database might have some performance issues. There might be an impact to your production. We can test it in a mirrored or UAT environment if you like. Do you understand that this might cause your site to have an impact? When I'm doing this, I'm going to be doing this amount of testing. Do you know how you recover it if there is a situation? And are you actually aware of this? So when you've given me your point of contact, are you actually fully aware that I need you to be in a position to respond to me on a phone while I'm running my testing? So potentially out of band, I can call you up and get an immediate response from you. And it's not that they should never take a lunch break, but sometimes you can end up being again, maybe it's just me, formally assign someone who... Anyway, what assets do you actually have? What coverage are we going to be applying? And what impact might it actually have? So I'm thinking, well, after all of this, how do we actually try and make you apply some of these lessons? So are you able to coherently tell me what shouldn't be tested? And say why? And say, if it is, for whatever reason, touched upon, how to respond to it. And when you finish testing, in an ideal world, we're going to be doing this full risk assessment, but obviously that's having a 3-hour call with the project manager, the head of IT, the head of security, all of the owners for each of the areas. But I don't know about if there's any testers, but often we're the first people to get blamed. So when people say, well, you're testing my web app, DC's just gone down. It must be you guys. Potentially they can end up wasting quite a lot of time doing an investigation into just a completely unrelated activity, losing time on their own protection, defense and triage, because they're just sort of inherently victimizing us as poor testers. But for the client, not being aware, potentially because we've not told them, or potentially because they've not asked a question, that we're not touching that. So if it does have an incident, maybe shoot us a message, but start your own investigation. And having a full awareness, so maybe not going for the full risk assessment, but at least making all of the owners know, well, we are having pen testing done. This might impact your service line because you're managing the website that's backed by this prod DB. Sometimes you can end up in situations where it feels like, again, asking like sort of friends and colleagues, it is just the immediate security team that's aware that a pen test is occurring, not by design, but just by a lack of communication. And then finally, when we're done testing, is the environment being reset? Our accounts being wiped? And don't just say reset. I mean, actually, all of the changes made have been logged by the testers, and they're able to provide them and say, delete these accounts, and I faffed with that, and I changed that reg key, and I need you to reset it. I don't know how many times I've been on site and I've seen the domain admin account that I've used previously still there, disabled, but potentially, depending on your OUs and stuff, in a position where a bad actor could re-enable it, and it was in the pentester OU as well, so it's potentially got less logging than might otherwise be the case. When you've done the changes, are they being retested? Are your actions actually being reapplied? And when you're doing this and you have an incident, are you actually updating your assets, your data? Are you actually saying, next time we need to avoid, and not just this whole subnet, not just internal testing or Wi-Fi testing, because that was a problem last year, but the specific, sort of, your joiners moving the levers for your assets as well, essentially. And I think it's kind of important for, as testers, when we are reporting, you have your executive summary, and you won't say SQL injection. You'll say, I was able to get the personal data of all of these users, because that's contextualizing it for the audience that's going to be reading it. When we're talking about the potential risk of testing, we need to be doing the same thing. But we're saying, actually, in human, here's the outcome for this. Here's what could be happening. Here's what could be impacted. Short one-slide tangent. I'm going to call it low context testing. So the growth of offshore testing, AI assisted, AI enhanced, fully autonomous testing. I'm going to call it low context. One of the lessons, or the anecdotes that I guess kind of stuck with me was the owner of a company he used to work for said, no matter how far down or disconnected you feel like when you're testing, if you're in the NHS trust, or if you're actually sort of in a CNI position, you're not there because of the contractor or the contractor above you and above you and above you. You're there because they don't want to get hacked and they need to protect themselves, and they don't want people to be waiting for an ambulance because the control room's computers have crashed. They don't want to be waiting for power station to come back online or water to be dispensed. We are directly responsible for the reduction of harm. And that means you're not actually that far, even though it sometimes can feel quite disconnected, you're not that far removed from risk to life as a tester. Whether it's while you're doing the work and making changes, or whether it's because something wasn't found or could have been found earlier. And it's kind of stuck with me. And you want to try to get as much context as you can. Take a step back and say to the customer, why are you doing this test? What is the actual motivation? You want a web app test. What's your concern? Are you worried about a specific bad actor? Are you worried about an internal threat? And let's see, is there anything else we should be including within this? And when we've got this rise of low context testing, we just need to be aware. Third parties need to be up to speed with what you're doing. When you have more automated solutions, are you actually implementing guardrails that are appropriate? Are you making sure that the right things are being included, but potentially things which shouldn't be battered aren't being battered? Not really got any recommendations here, but don't just go exploit. There should be at least an objective to the testing. You should be aware of what you're deploying and what the ramifications are. So, yeah, to conclude, I've got a section heading for the conclusion. Know your tools, know your client, know your test, and your target. And for everyone, test the target, impact, and recovery. So, obviously without saying, security testing is meant to explore what could realistically be exploitable by an attacker. Neutering this approach by just adding everything to exclusion is obviously not going to improve the accuracy of the assessment. It's not going to improve your subsequent business decisions. The risk that they're interpreting or the security of the business isn't going to be helped by just dumping everything as an exclude. So don't just do that. Try and actually understand comprehensively why you're doing stuff. But, wow, massively early. But yeah, hopefully you didn't find it as deathly boring as it could have been. I'm sorry I didn't do the high-vis gimmick, but I think I might have died. And if you have any questions, thank you. That is what I want to hear. Oh, go on.
Ava, are we putting the cart before the horse? Pentesting feels like it should be the end result of a longer GRC piece of work, cyber risk, architecture risk. Are you saying you think we're maybe leading with a pen test, leading with something offensive? It's going a bit
nice.
From a bigger.
It sometimes feels like that is, we hit the security step. What do we do in the security step? What we pen test? And yeah, maybe getting more of an involvement in paperwork earlier and actually saying, well, why? What are the full risks here? Could be worth doing. Just going straight in for... Yeah, if you're not getting involved earlier, I think it's probably something we see with with testing normally. In my experience, at least, it gets to code freeze and people go, oh, shit, a pen test. And then that's suddenly the activities happening there. Potentially getting involved early and saying, well, actually, I mean, that's slightly wandering out of the scope. But yeah, starting talking about make your security considerations earlier. Make sure you're actually aware of what could be impacted just inherently from knowing what you're deploying. When you're just rapidly spinning up code and dropping it everywhere, well, where is that going? Are you now making a massive cloud risk or anything like that?
When you were on site in that factory with your friend and he gave you the safety briefing, gave you the tour around and everything, I've been on site at factories and had similar things happen.
Yeah.
It feels like, I don't know if this is legally motivated or just common sense, as you were saying, it feels like they are taking responsibility to make sure you are safe.
Yes.
And that something bad doesn't happen to you. So,
oh, interesting. Nice.
Tying that over to pen testing, whose responsibility is it at the end of the day? Because we're coming into a client's site and testing their stuff, are we expected to have calls with them to understand everything that's going to go on, understand the systems, and do our own risk assessment to keep ourselves safe for them, keep their stuff safe, or are they having that responsibility? And should we expect them to have that responsibility?
Yeah. So, I mean, as a check...
Was that a big one?
Yeah. As a check and cyber scheme...
A bit philosophical.
No,
I think it's a good natural way for this thinking to go, though.
I'm a CTO. Yeah. I'm a cyber scheme team leader. I have an obligation under both of those to know what I'm doing. Yeah. So when I'm doing the testing, to know this is the impact of it, like from an ethical sort of be able to restore stuff. Yeah. I shouldn't be just blapping DOS scripts all over the place.
We should know our tools, right?
We should know our tools. But equally, yeah, I mean, the system owner, they'll inherently have their own responsibility and they'll need to be aware of what their stuff is.
But like, I, as a tester, have taken a hit saying this is your fault for taking our systems down.
Yeah.
And I'm there like, I just, ran Nmap.
Yeah.
How has it gone down?
Yeah.
You do an X minus F bit. CMI infrastructure, you will take shit down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what happened that was unexpected, I scanned a bunch of SQL servers, all on a hypervisor, all sharing the same physical network interface.
Mm-hmm.
Scanned them in parallel, and it took out that network interface, took out the server that the floor cable. That's not exactly something, that doesn't, the question of how many virtual hosts are sharing one network, that doesn't come up in a standard, like when we're talking about.
I don't think clients realise that, so I won't know the sector, but hypothetically that MRI machines are actually, they're not machines, they're migrating beasts. Yeah. And they will turn up on guest Wi-Fi or in weird subnets and VLANs that they shouldn't be in, and that they've sworn they've never been there before, but they also haven't changed since 2003. Yeah. So, yeah, it's kind of the point where you go, well, I think with the low context testing, I like to think as testers, when we see, for instance, my colleague who found Server 2003 on a network and set about throwing everything he could at my responder box, is that actually what you're seeing? Are you actually set out to exploit it? So if I'm in a healthcare situation and I'm seeing embedded Windows or Windows Server, I'm often not going to touch the thing because I know what those devices look like. And
the risk is too high.
When I first started testing, I was in a factory and I saw a machine. I sort of said, well, what's the impact of that? Can I see it? I think 1710 had come out, and I was like, I want to play with that. And he said, well, if you do that and you knock it off, because it is potentially going to happen, that will be about 100k an hour. So no, don't do that. Actually taking a step back and saying, well, with automated or driven tooling as well, who's responsible for that? Well, they'll just come back and say you.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Step one. OT testing is not a CTO. Don't treat it as
Absolutely.
Okay. There is a danger of killing them. It is the tester's responsibility. You go in and mess with their gear.
And brick it.
You need to eat a lot of humble pie really quick.
Could I put the alternative to that?
What's that?
As the organisation, you're governed by the Health and Safety Work Act. And the Health and Safety Work Act says you will protect people at the organisation and employees and others.
Yes.
So therefore the organisation is responsible.
Ultimately, the organisation is responsible legally. However, as a competent professional, you shouldn't go and do something you are not competent to do. And OT is a really good one. And tends to be
But that's subject to an appropriate risk assessment. So if you do the risk assessment, you would avoid the item that would cause the bother.
The only trouble is going back to what you said, the assets and networks, the amount of sites that don't have a clear identification of their assets, a clear identification of
what's on them.
What's on what network.
A clear identification of the risks in that.
Which comes back to the inappropriate risk assessment, so they're done for that.
Correct. But even if you know it's their responsibility, as a professional, should you risk Armageddon just because it's not your fault?
It would be a difficult one to defend
No,
to
you have to
NCC.
identify the risks before you pursue.
Correct. And if you can't identify every individual risk because there isn't the knowledge there, or there isn't the information, and you've got 4 days to do your test, then it would take 4 months to find everything. What do? Sorry?
Just turn up the test.
Don't turn up. So what you have to do what you said, is you treat it as your normal everyday thing. You don't walk across the road without looking at a traffic light. If you do, you expect to be hit by a bus. Treat it appropriately. So if it's a delicate situation, you treat it delicately. You tippy-toe as if you're going to stand on a landmine. And then you reduce the risk to the absolute minimum you can whilst doing the job you're there to do.
We often ask for a sacrifice beastie. So if I'm saying, well, these issues follow trends, generally all of these servers will be missing the update. Is there one that I can demonstrate this on? So you can take to your board to say, I need to actually get funding to replace these or grade these or patch these. That you get an example, but I don't know what half of these systems are, but based on just the host name, I'm getting a bit of the heebie-jeebies that this might not be something I want to muck around with.
If you know the site has things that move, and there's a danger of death, you ask for it to be, when I test this, I need this line or this system in a safe state, as in, it's not operating, people are out of bounds. And if we can't put it in that state, then you can't test.
I reckon the company would get the rap for it for risking it, but I would struggle to, in a situation where I would be standing up and saying, well, I don't actually know what the risk was, but I wanted to do a hack, so I did the hack. I don't think I would still be a CTL after that meeting, but I think it would be a hard one to justify me saying I was confident in my tooling and the ramifications of it, and some person's dead because the ambulance didn't get out in time as a result of it.
Provided with the scope, and you to scope.
But I think if it...
It's very woolly.
I think the other thing to consider is if you bought a car and you heard that this car could cause danger to life, would you still drive it?
It does every day.
Yeah, but I mean,
it's a pretty dangerous weapon, isn't it?
Yeah, but I'm thinking if this was at the risk of blowing up or whatever, sometimes cars go on fire, would you still be considered a smart person?
I think the bigger risk there was the salespeople in my Volvo.
That's the question.
I think at that point it depends what happens. If this car spontaneously combusts because some debris went through the batteries, that's one thing. If you plough through a group of civilians, that's another thing.
Going back to this jet, that's a risk assessment. You do a risk assessment.
Yeah.
Suitable and sufficient.
And it may not always be an ideal situation, but you risk assess and you proceed appropriately.
And even enumerate. So if you're in a position where you're looking at, doing the answer, 5 different database servers and you don't know what they're doing, is there any, maybe it's more defensible knowing less than just exploiting one, but is there any way you could have known more? Could you have scanned more and tried to find out?
Isn't that what you're trying to contact?
Just ask them.
Agreed. So you can enumerate the different...
But you could get them to provide the enumeration.
Yeah.
It's all about because the bad guys didn't get it.
Yeah.
And just going back to the
domain
how the times are more likely to have your car going up in smoke if it says it's a car. Just FYI.
Oh, no. But I'm just saying if there was like a known thing where it could literally go and combust because someone's done something stupid with electronics, for instance. But like a thing like that. But going back to OT, I think one of the things to take into account is if they can't put it in a safe state, is it really safe to test it? It's really that fragile. If there's really that risk to life, would it be safe to test it?
No.
Because that's the kind of talk you have to have.
It depends what it is. So for example, if you're going to run an Nmap suite, then would you do that when it's operational? No, I would ask it to be the safe state to do an Nmap suite. Or potentially you turn down your Nmap suite for such a low progression. And again, just to log into a website with default threads, you're not going to crash it. You're not doing anything it doesn't normally do.
But you're not going to include all the scripts on it when you're doing
not
that.
going to be running scripts, but you should never, I would say in an operational environment, you should never do hacks. You should never try and hack it. Because you don't know what state you're going to leave it in.
Crash.
If you're going to hack it, get the device in a safe place, offline.
Yeah.
Hack it.
It's one of the ones where that's probably a situation where I would be having a thorough... I'd want to crack out the Visio diagrams. I'd want to have people sat going, well, I know every asset on this network. don't. If you start seeing like random rugged comms or
the people that
it's
know
normally a
every
problem.
asset don't normally talk to IT.
No.
And don't normally control people.
It's often in this weird position that's not actually sort of its own set of assets almost.
Yeah.
It sits off in its own little world. But
Well, absolutely safe. I mean, and you say about industry, certainly in certain industries, you don't go on site without your risk assessment and your method statement.
So the only one where they said, of the two of them, that the one situation was aerospace, as a specific example from their experience, was you were actively challenged for a get out of jail card, essentially. So anyone on site had to be presented or could be challenged and told, why are you here? What are you doing? What's the risk of that? How long for? And they were actively doing that because they agreed ahead of time. And obviously, given the nature of that industry, they want to make sure there's a full chain of someone can get the can if you've mucked up. And you're not going to be just shooting from the hip. You're actually fully aware of what you're doing. But it seemed like I think potentially tainted by the fact that they are in slightly different sectors. But thankfully, some places do take it very, very seriously. I'm not too sure. One of the things I just raised this to my colleagues, and they were saying, well, actually, we should be having like sort of discussion emergent here, this with clients when we start testing. In an ideal world where money was no object and clients were actually available, we could be having these like long afternoon full discussions of, well, if I get to this position when I can see this or this system or this system, what else will be there? What actions would you feel comfortable with me doing? And comprehensively, as much as we can on paper, running through the whole test, but it's not something we can realistically.
A lot of times the audience are not aware
that
you can tell that into it with default press. They're not aware that if you do a minus SV, it'll just go to the air. They don't know what NMAP is.
Is that not your job as a competent individual?
Absolutely.
You do
to express to them
every action you undertake.
Correct.
And you should know a rollback procedure. Is it a physical stop or is it an instant? If you hit that button, does that mean it's a control signal or is it going out? Because they're two different safety critical systems.
Yeah, normally an e-stop you just put the whole damn thing in a safe stop.
Unless you
But normally an e-stop is normally a physical, electrical, and it's an active death, so it's a brake circuit to so even if the circuit fails, it means. And a lot of these industries have been in a lot of safety and fail safe for a long, long time. Quite aware of it.
So during the tour, my friend was showing me around and he's sort of explaining the risks of the machines. And as he's saying this, he walks over to one. I think potentially just trying to show it, opens the doors and just starts faffing with it. Because he was fully confident and they tested that he knew it was actually off. But also when, at the point of opening the doors, the physical stops were triggered. And the idea of potentially doing that on a network of just knowing that it will be inherently safe. It's not.
But again, as you say, often when you're testing, it's not.
You don't see
it's
that.
not real, is it?
Yeah.
No, it's just a command.
But potentially you would test at the actual device of that device rather than of a network. So then you could isolate that particular element and test it in
and that's if you want to do more,
as part of your risk assessment.
If you want to do more than a trivial test, you take the device or a equivalent device, you take them in the lab, you test them in the lab.
We'll get them to mirror the whole setup, as we've done a few times. Just build the whole network on a mirror.
Never like that. Gentle testing. It means you miss a lot of shit, but you don't kill anyone. You don't kill anyone. And you find plenty anyway, especially you find so much.
With the caveat of at least saying, though, to the knowledge of the client, this is an actual mirror. Because sometimes, in our experience, UAT can drift a bit, or could be ahead or behind, and it doesn't actually reflect the situation. But that's one way it's on the client to provide you with it, essentially.
That's why you put your caveats in. And again, it's only a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
You only see what you see. What's that? So is it space? Motto is Don't fuck things up.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of an outlier, so I've no idea what Nmap is. I'm an electronics engineer,
Awesome.
so I'm from the OT world, so that's my interest in this. The amount of parallels are quite stark. So, for example, like your friend opening that cabinet, well, my thought would be, how old is the safety switch on that? Could it have worn out? So I would always test something first to check it had actually turned the power off. But I've done things like I've wired the e-stops up on the robot cage in around working.
I've been meaning to look more into cobotics and the idea people just lose their head by
Yeah, I mean, these aren't cobots, these are full industrial ones that could literally take your head off the computer and enter full speed. But I was the only electronics engineer, the only electrical guy there, so I've gone on holiday, we've got a new guy in, head of additive manufacturing. Turns out he's the biggest jerk anybody's ever heard of. PhD from Cranfield. I think they were just glad to get rid of him. And when I got back, I had all these strange questions. So we had a robotics guy who was on contract. He just programmed it. He didn't understand the electrical side of things that everybody did. So that's where we sort of test across over. It's just one of these strange questions. It turned out a part that they'd ordered, I'd not ordered it, wasn't sufficient for what it needed to do, and thought it was working back to front. So this guy said, well, can't we just swap the wires around? It's like, let's make some great. No, let's start some doing it. But it's running on 240 volts, and he was willing to just swap the line and neutral around. Just to work.
Well, that's it. I've been jumping. You want to get next time, isn't it?
So you've got issues like that, people meddling, or where people have ordered the wrong part. And I guess it's the same with IT. If somebody's ordered something and they don't know what they're doing, and they've got the wrong part, and you go and expect it to do something and it doesn't, or it does something you don't expect it to do. There's so many parallels there. And also the OT world is becoming more and more networks. There's the new machine regulations that are coming in. So everything that I've previously built would need to be able to be updated by the owner.
Is it we went through like the 13459, like the new one coming in of like smart systems like now. They've got 32-bit.
I admit I've escaped from that going to further education now, so it's not my problem. But I did fully document everything and I've labelled everything, so...
Because they were saying now that the vendor actually has to provide these updates to all the actual industrial machinery. They can't just say, right, you plugged it in now, that's yours, good luck. They have to go through the JavaScript libraries of a 2002.
It's very interesting because how long this takes to get in. And also persuading that as long as E26, E27 on the maritime on vessels. And the shipbuilders say, well, our order books are full. If you want that, go see somebody else, you know? So how long it will take for some of these rules to get in? And then they don't apply to the legacy equipment. And how old was the kit? Because robotics was fairly new. But it's not
the robotics, the stuff I built is all that custom built embedded electronics.
A lot of it's not, you know, it's not abnormal to go and find 20-year-old kit, even 30-year-old.
Yeah, some of the stuff we were seeing on the floor, I think it was still on a bus system, just the same, like what you find in like an older car, controlling all these old factory.
Yeah, mine
not my world.
CAN bus, but then most of the industrial field buses run on CAN bus and just got a different abstraction layer. So
you got your coffee bus,
all the other ones are pain in the backside, basically.
But again, you know, this stuff's there. So how long will it take for the new race to get actually deployed to any level of?
But then I guess there's parallels with us. Like we've known Kerberos is better, to the point where the Burp Suite plugin to fix Kerberos is itself end of life and not maintained anymore. Because it's like 2002, and that was given up in 2017. So the idea
you're saying is all these people that have been working in factories for years that probably are just doing the same thing pretty much day in, day out, and perhaps aren't reading up on stuff. It's going to be an oh shit moment. Whereas because we were a startup, we were literally R&D, making it as we go along.
That's the additive part.
Yeah. We might have, well, not that problem.
One of the gripes they had was one of them saying, well, their work is all CE marked. And he's just staring at this. They've ordered the wrong part. He knows he could solder it, but it would invalidate the whole chain to muck with it, even though they're just going to pay someone else to do the same thing. But it has to be done by a competent professional who understands what happens if they accidentally bridge something. Or I'm not too sure if introducing that level of slowdown on my job would be nice to do, but certainly exploring some of it might be interesting.
That's a part of the problem. That's not a actual that's or availability problem in terms of the appropriate sparing for the devices within a manageable timescale.
But then I think the overhead of adding a day, half day to every project, or making sure that actually we're not just carbon copying last year's, but we're properly re-reviewing the risks, I think it would be hard to justify to companies. Because someone's got to pay for staff to do that, I think was the problem. But I think in a world where we had a lot more time and energy, that would be good. But I think at least as testers, for our part, we can do what we can to make people aware of it in sort of English. But,
so you're suggesting that going on site without a valid risk assessment as of today is a good idea?
No. But when we're doing pen testing, maybe sitting down and doing our own version of that, I think it would be a great idea. But I think it might be a hard sell.
A lot of times these days, you don't actually go on site, do you? So you don't go through that gate where somebody says, where you rounds, you know?
Potentially, that's exactly what you need to do in order to enforce the good behaviour that you're looking for.
Yeah.
And the attention to detail of the person, because if they're sat in their bedroom, it's at home.
Sometimes in the home
don't know, and you've got absolutely no way of contacting that person to say, what the hell are you doing? Stop immediately.
For the client's side, doing that, I mean, if any of you are clients, I would say I don't think I know a tester who wouldn't be happy to be challenged and said, what are you actually doing today? And maybe I've had clients where they've wanted a 2-hour wash up at the end of each day to go over what I've done today, what I'm doing tomorrow. That obviously does eat into your time a bit, but if they're happy to pay for it, and we're always happy to say, well, I'm going to be doing this, there is a risk of this, I'm going to be doing that.
Another thing is, any OT environment have maintenance downtime. They don't pay the downtime. So the concept of maintenance periods and doing the testing in maintenance periods is not something they don't know.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly valid request.
And it's fairly often for our part, even outside of OT, to do testing during a code freeze, or we don't want major deployments when we're testing. It's a moving target.
Doing your bit to make sure you reduce that risk as far as possible, is your professional responsibility to that. For me, there's no question in it. It's your professional responsibility to reduce the risk of anything you do. You disagree with
Is there a consideration though that if you're testing only when things have been made safe or during the maintenance period, that it's almost a contrived setup? You're not testing the same reality that would be there if an attacker was just doing what the hell they want when they want, and therefore you'd miss more than...
On the whole, this kit is doing this. It doesn't. If it's not moving anything, if it's not the electronics that are stopped, it's all the big bits that whiz around. They're in a safe state, so the motors
is that
are
not
off.
some of the thing that also needs to be tested, are Stuxnet centrifuges?
That's not. Yeah, I would say it's not necessarily the scope.
Probably
getting
not,
quite down to a detailed scope.
But then equally, there's sometimes
That would be offline.
But offline, if you need to test it hard, and these things should be tested hard, you do it offline.
But then even taking a step back, potentially for other internal pen tests, I've done engagements before where I've been testing an air-gap network. I said, well, is it an air-gap network? And they said, yeah, it's totally air-gapped. We just let 445 through. And so we're actually testing that in live when I'm seeing these requests go through containing sort of into them. That's probably actually useful to do. Whereas if it was off, like asking for simulated traffic or pretending that it was live and seeing the messages crossing the system can be useful. But I guess it depends on how much energy and time they want to spend making it look realistic.
How do you update it dependent? How do you patch capture systems?
Not normal.
Well, they don't normally, so.
Within 14 days to see what's going on.
In 14 years, you could look at
They just tend to have them out of scope now, so
Yeah.
those kind of legacy systems, picking out of scope just don't really work.
Well, I'm not up to speed with that. There's the maritime one as well, though. They must have been encountering that a lot.
What, the E26, E27?
For the IASME, was that a naval thing they've started doing, an aviation. I thankfully let my CE lapse, though, unfortunately. This is my very dull talk. I hope you've all found it exciting. I'm going to start running into the next slot, I think.
It's a break.
Is it a break? Ah, go. Thank you very much.